Do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. I don't know a single person who hasn't heard some version of that. Find your passion, your purpose, love what you do, live your calling. We've been telling people this for over a decade. We've built entire industries around it, career coaches, purpose workbooks, LinkedIn quotes, commencement speeches. But I need to say something real about it, just for a second. For a lot of people, that message has not been freeing. It's been a little bit crushing because if you don't feel a calling, if you don't wake up so excited to go to work, if your job isn't just a job, you've been made to feel like something's wrong with you. And I don't think there is something wrong with you. I think we've been telling people the wrong story about what work is actually for. Welcome back to Worth the Work. I'm Courtni Hughes-Bochenek, and I've spent the last 16 years in people and culture. And through all of those years, I keep coming back to the same question. What is actually worth the work? Today's episode is called The Job Is Not the Point. And before you close the tab on me, I want to say something. This isn't an episode about giving up on meaningful work. I've spent my entire career trying to help people find meaning in what they do, and I still believe in that. But somewhere along the way, we started turning meaningful work into an obligation to love your job, to live for it, to become your job. And I want to spend today pulling those things apart because they're not the same. I think it makes a difference. I think the difference between those things is one of the most important reframes that we can make right now. So let's get into it. Let me tell you where I think this story started from. Somewhere around 15, maybe 20 years ago, we collectively decided that a good career should be a passion, that your work should be an expression of your identity, and that a real, ideal job would feel less like work and more like a calling. Some of that came from really good places. We were reacting to an era where people took a job because it paid the bills, and then they stayed there for 40 years without really considering whether it was actually a fit for them. That era wasn't perfect either. But we were reacting to industries where meaning was hard to come by, so we started saying to a generation of workers, don't settle, find what you love, chase your purpose, and in some ways that was really a gift. But in a lot of ways it wasn't, because for every person who genuinely found calling in their work, there's been a whole lot more who found a job to just be a job. A good job, a useful job, a job where they were reasonably competent, that paid the bills, and that made space for the rest of their life. And instead of celebrating that as the win that it is, we started teaching them to be embarrassed by it. We taught them that if their job wasn't their passion, they're failing. We taught them that engagement means loving your work, and that a good career means finding a job that lights you up inside. I've started to believe that message has done a little bit more harm than we measured and were prepared for, because it's left a huge number of people feeling like they're somehow broken for having a perfectly good, perfectly reasonable, perfectly honest working life. So let me say something that I think is a little closer to the truth for most people. Work is not the point. Work is what makes the point possible. Work is what pays for the house. It's what funds the trips and what puts the kids through school. Work is what allows the Saturday mornings and the Wednesday date nights and the vacation days and the retirement someday, hopefully. Work is what funds the life you actually want to live. And that isn't lesser. That isn't settling. That is one of the most honest things we can say about a working life. Some of the healthiest, most well-adjusted people I've ever known have jobs they like just fine. Not jobs that they love or they live for, not jobs that are callings maybe, not jobs they do for free either. They're jobs that they show up for, they do well, they care about it, and then at the end of the day, they go home so they can be with the people they love most. That's not failure. That's a life. And I think we owe a lot of apologies to the people we've made feel like less than for living it that way. Here's what I've noticed about the people who hold this frame really well. They are not less committed to their work. They're more committed to the whole picture of their life. They can be excellent at their job without needing it to be their entire identity. They care about what they do without needing it to completely fulfill them. They can take a job that pays well and maybe doesn't feel like a quote-unquote calling, but they're still building a fulfilling life around it. And then they can leave their job on a Friday afternoon without their sense of self coming loose in the process. That's a superpower, actually, because when your identity isn't fused to your work, you can make cleaner decisions about the work that you do. You can leave when it's time to leave. You can push back when you need to push back. You can advocate for yourself or take a break or say no without feeling like you're betraying who you are. Losing my dad taught me something about this, because when someone you love is gone, you don't sit with the moments that made you really great at your job. You sit with the moments that made you a person. And I've realized that the version of me that showed up at his hospital bed, the version that sat with my family afterwards, the one that held my kids close and shared the terrible news. The version that had energy to give to the people I loved most was only possible because I hadn't spent everything at work first. Work is what's funding those moments. It doesn't get to be the reason they exist. I want to name something specific to the people who work in people and culture, because I think we've actually been a part of this problem. For years, we've been selling engagement to leaders as proxy for how much do your people love working here. We've built survey questions around meaning. We've written employee brand messages about our missions. We've told candidates in interviews that we want people who are passionate about what we do. And a lot of that language, honestly, was pointing at the wrong thing. Because the most engaged, retained, high-performing employees I've watched over the last 16 years were not always the ones who described their work as their calling. They were the ones who felt respected, who trusted their managers, who had clarity about what was expected from them. They felt like they were paid fairly and they could see a path forward. Most importantly, they had a life outside of work and they were treated like people who deserved one. Engagement was never really about loving the job. It was about the job supporting the life. And I think it's time we're saying that out loud in this profession because the leaders and organizations still trying to sell the love your job as the whole employee experience are setting up a lot of really good people to feel broken for wanting something more sustainable, for wanting more than work to be their entire identity. So here's the question I want to leave you with this week. Not, do you love your job? That question isn't useful, and honestly, it isn't fair. My question is this. What is your job actually funding in your life right now? Not just the mortgage or the bills, the even bigger stuff, the people, the moments, maybe the trips, the Saturday mornings, the retirement someday, the version of yourself you're building alongside the paycheck. What is work paying for that actually matters to you? And are you giving those things the attention they deserve? Because if the job is what funds the life, then the life is what the job is for. And most of us have been holding those two in the wrong order. If this episode gave you permission to hold your job a little more loosely and your life a little bit more closely, I'd love it if you'd share it with someone who needs to hear it too. That's how these conversations are going to continue to grow. And you can find me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear your reframe answer. And if you haven't already, please subscribe wherever you listen so you don't miss what's next. Until next time.